This is part 2 of the classic Craftsman Drill Press accessory, the Vari-SLO Speed Control Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 1, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we're going to be disassembling, cleaning, and polishing. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. This is the parts diagram listed in the owner's manual, which is linked in the description of this video, and it'll help us with disassembly. And this is how I received the Vari-SLO from one of my viewers. So we unboxed all of that. And here we are with the basic parts. So this is the main component, and it's comprised of about 7 different parts. You've got the 2 pulleys on top. Those are on shafts. You've got a pulley bracket, which the shafts mount into. You've got 2 connection links that come down to the column bracket. Then we have the pulley link and the connection link assembly, and then the head casting assembly. And there are 3 half-inch V-belts that are 17-inch, 20 inches, and 21 inches. As you can see on those pulleys, we'll take a closer look here in a minute, but that center section is coned on both sides and it moves independently and allows the sheave to expand or contract. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm removing these. There's 4 of these set screws, 2 on the bottom of each pulley, and I have no idea what they do. On the other side of those set screws, there is the sleeve that's brass that the Reeves style center sheave slides on, and on the other side of that, or inside that brass sleeve, sits a bearing. So the bearing is what actually is mounted on the shaft. So I don't know what those set screws do. Perhaps all of this, it looks like to me, it was pressed together, and maybe that's what kind of kept the brass sleeve in place, but I don't know. Any case, you can just pull these pulleys straight off of the pulley shafts that they're on. There's nothing really holding them down. Now, that screw that I'm removing there and the other screw I removed beforehand both actually hold the shafts in the pulley bracket. Each one of those shafts has a flat side to them, and that set screw locks into that flat. But here we can get a good look at these pulleys, and they have some really cool embossing on them that you can see the bearings right there. So I don't know what those set screws do. They don't, makes no sense at all. But hey, maybe somebody else has a better idea than me. But anyways, there was some really cool embossing on those pulleys that says Savage Manufacturing and then Phoenix, Arizona. And both of these pulleys are exactly the same, so there's no front or rear. 2 little rings that I'm picking up there are what they call spacers, but they're basically just little single loop rings that go under the pulley on the pulley shaft. And here we are with the head casting assembly, and it's got 2 set screws. These are leveling set screws, and we'll explain all of that when we get to the installation video. But and then there's a set screw on the face, so we can just loosen the knob, move it out of the way, tighten it back down, and then we can pull that set screw out. So that's the 3 set screws. This one is longer, and those other 2 are short. And then we can undo the control knob assembly and remove it. Now, behind that, there is a aluminum shoe that rides between the control knob screw and the face part of that head casting assembly. So really, to get that apart, all you've got to do is lift the control arm, which is the part that I'm swinging back and forth. But before we take it off of there are two cone head screws on the bottom of this assembly, and they are there to lock the head assembly into the actual head of the drill press. So now we can just literally lift that piece off, and you'll see me kind of fiddle with it here, and there it goes. And the little aluminum shoe fell out, and that's it right there. So there is a pivot pin in there, and we'll take that out later on. And on the control arm, it literally looks like a nail that is the indicator. So I'm just going to grab it with a pair of vice grips and twist it out of there. And there we go. So that is kind of all the disassembly we're going to do with these parts, except for removing the bearings. And we'll take the rest of this apart later. At this point in the disassembly, I didn't know if I wanted to remove. Oh, sorry, forgot to mention. Man, that dial indicator panel is in mint condition. It looks gorgeous. But if your indicator panel is actually on your head casting assembly, this is how you get it off of there. All three of those drive screws have holes all the way through the assembly, so you can just tap them out from the back side with a very small, I think this is a 1/16 of an inch punch. And we're going to replace these drive screws when we reassemble everything. But I attached it to this just to show you how to get it off of there. All right. So, like I said, the last thing we're going to do is pull those bearings out of the pulleys. So, this is similar to how you remove quill bearings in the drill press. I'm just going to stick a rod through the inner bore of one bearing and press it onto the inner race of the other bearing, and then smack it with a hammer. And that bearing will fall out. Now, I'm going to replace these bearings. These are sealed bearings, and I prefer shielded bearings. So on this side, it'll be much easier. We can just stick anything down in there that's going to rest on the inner race and then tap out that bearing. Rinse and repeat for the other pulley. And you can see that set screw hole right there, and you can see there's nothing on the inside of that but the brass sleeve. So makes no sense. I don't know. Anyways, getting the knob off of the rod that it's connected to. It has some sort of thread lock on there, and for good reason. But we'll just put some thread locker on there when we clean all that up and reinstall it. So here we are, and this is how everything is, and we're just going to soak everything for 24 hours in simple green. But before we do that, I was wrong. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to knock those two shafts out of the bracket, out of the pulley bracket. So they drop down inside. And that should be telling you that they are slightly tapered, and that the hole that they go into, or the bore, is slightly tapered as well. All right, so everything is going into the simple green except for the dial panel. That thing is in mint condition, and if you soak it in simple green, it will remove all of the paint that is on it. So we're not going to soak that at all. But everything else you see here, oh, and obviously the belts are not going into simple green. Simple green, not the best thing for rubber. But all of the small set screws and all that kind of stuff, the pulleys will go in here. Everything that's metal or plastic can go into simple green. And it really doesn't matter what kind of metal it is. It'll be fine in the simple green. And we don't have to worry about derusting any of this because it's all made of Zamic, with the exception of a few, like the pins, for instance, are all steel. But just about everything else is either Zamic or those brass sleeves that are inside the pulleys themselves. And Zamic is an alloy, very similar to aluminum. So you really don't have to worry about it rusting. So there's no reason to derust. But simple green, it's my go-to cleanup stuff. It's cheap, easy to use, blah, blah, blah. We'll let that sit for 24 hours. So when we come back 24 hours later, we're going to rinse all that off with just cold water, and then we're going to towel dry everything. And it was at this point that I decided, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and take everything apart. So we're going to be popping those pins out of those pieces and then soaking them again in simple green. So if you look closely here, you can see that one side of these pins has splines on it and the other side does not. So what we want to do is we want to drive it so that the spline parts are being pushed out, not passing all the way through. So there we go. And all four of these pins are put in the same direction, so they're all going to come out the same direction. And you probably could get away with removing them in the wrong direction maybe once or twice, but after that you're going to make that hole too large for those pins where the splines are supposed to stop the pin from going further through. It'll no longer function like they're supposed to. So it's just better to disassemble it the correct way the first time, and then you don't have to worry about that. As you can see, there's still a good amount of gunk at each one of those connections and on the pins, so all that stuff's going to get re-soaked, like I said, in simple green again, just to pull any of that dirt and oil and grease and stuff off. So we're going to remove the pivot pin that's in the head casting. So the pin doesn't want to move very well, and out of an abundance of caution, I end up flipping this thing over and I end up driving it through the wrong way. Like I said, it's not the end of the world, but yeah, it should have come out the other way. Same with the link assembly. It should be coming out the other way, but I drive it straight through. But it's not the end of the world. So all that's going to go inside the bin again, some more simple green. Let that soak for another 24 hours. So again, we pull everything out, rinse it off, and then towel dry it. All of the steel parts like the pins will go into that plastic bin and sprayed down with WD-40 for the time being. And then we're going to be ready to start sanding and polishing. First thing we're going to do is we're going to dry sand all of these pieces. So I'm not so concerned with anything that hasn't been milled. In other words, here you can see there's a milled line and the bosses around those holes are all milled. And then the face of that is milled. So those are the areas that I'm going to sand. And with dry sanding, I'm using 100 grit, 120, 220, 320, and then we go to wet sanding. So for wet sanding, we're going to be doing 400, 600, 800, and 1,000 grit. We're going to rinse that piece off between each grit. And after we finish the wet sanding, we will rinse everything off again and then towel dry it before we move on to the polishing step. So for polishing, my go-to is the Mother's Mag and Aluminum Polish. You can get this at any of your auto parts stores. And basically we're just going to apply this to any of the areas that we sanded. And after we do that, we'll let it sit for about 10 minutes and then we're going to take it over to the buffing wheel. And here we are at the buffing wheel and we're just buffing that off. And some of these pieces can be quite challenging on how you're going to buff them, but yeah, no big deal. After we finish buffing everything, then we're going to come back and hand buff it and remove any of the remaining polish compound that's on any of these parts, and most of these parts will have a chrome-like look to them at this point. So I think they turned out great. Next, we're going to do a similar process to the pulleys, but I don't want to damage or lose that embossed lettering, so really, we're not going to do any sanding. What we're going to do is I'm using a Scotch-Brite pad and I'm just cleaning the pulley up with a Scotch-Brite pad. And I've got the pulley on a jig that I've rigged up and it's inside my metal lathe. After we cleaned it up with the Scotch-Brite, then we can apply the mag and aluminum polish to it. And then we'll buff them. And I should note here that, the way that these pulleys are assembled, that Zamek, it looks to me like it was heated up, or when it was formed, because Zamek is something that you cast, like aluminum. They formed it around the brass, or they somehow put all this together, pressed it all together while it was hot. So disassembling these things beyond this point, maybe it can be done. It's not anything that I felt comfortable with doing. So I kept them as they are and just cleaned them up as best I could and polished them as best I could as they are. And again, this isn't my Vari-SLO. If it had been mine, I may have been willing to take a little bit more risk with it, but yeah, not my toys, so I don't want to break them. In any case, the pulleys came out decent. They didn't look like chrome, but they came out decent. Definitely looked better than they originally did. Next thing we're going to do is we're just going to polish that control knob, and so we just threaded the knob back on its stud that it goes on, and for polishing it we're using Meguiar's cleaner wax. And I use this stuff to clean up all the panels, and I use it to clean the feed handle knobs on drill presses. It's a really good polish for plastics in my opinion. But we just put it on there, let it sit for about 15 minutes, and then buff it off. And it does a really good job. Now again, I didn't want to sand this knob. I could have gotten it to shine a lot better than it is right now, but I just didn't want to sand it and take the risk of damaging it. So again, not my toys. But it still looks great. And here we are with the dial panel. And we're just going to use the Meguiar's plastic cleaner polish again on this. And I found it to be safe on just about everything. So it's never removed paint or anything like that on anything that I've worked on. So after about 15 minutes, come back and just buff it off. And we could just roll with this panel like it is right now if we wanted to, but with it being in the near mint condition that it is in, both the owner and I decided that we want to clear coat this just to protect it. So that's what we're going to do next. So I let that sit for about 24 hours, and then we came back and clear coated. And this is a high gloss clear coat that I'm applying, and so I let it sit for 24 hours because I didn't want to have any possibility of the clear coat reacting with the cleaner polish that we just applied to it. So this got about 4 coats of clear coat, and then we let it sit for probably about 24 hours before we handled it. But that's going to wrap up this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. In the next video, we will be assembling all of these parts and then showing you exactly what this very slow speed control can do. So like I said, the owner's manual is in the description below. If you got questions, post them. And as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.